You don't wake up. You surface. It's a slow, reluctant ascent from a darkness that offers no rest, only a temporary reprieve. The first thing you feel is the cold. The polished cypress floorboards are like slabs of ice against your skin, leaching warmth from your body through the thin silk of your sleeping robe. The air in the room is heavy, a cloying perfume of last night's excesses, stale, high-quality sake, phantom traces of expensive incense, and the undeniable metallic scent of sweat. It's the smell of manufactured pleasure, a shiver, not entirely from the cold, traces a path down your spine. You open your eyes. The pre-dawn light is a weak, gray watercolor washed through the paper of the shoji screen. Outside, in the meticulously raked gravel garden, you can hear the first, tentative chirps of a waking bird. It sounds impossibly free. Inside, the only sound is the rhythmic, almost imperceptible whisper of your own breathing. You are an object at rest, waiting to be animated. You push yourself up, your joints protesting with a silent ache. The choreography of the morning begins. Every movement is precise, memorized, beaten into you until it has replaced instinct. Fold the futon, smooth the robe, tie the obi sash. As you straighten, your eyes catch your reflection in the polished surface of a lacquer box. The face that stares back is a stranger's mask, pale, sculpted, with eyes that have learned to be beautiful, placid pools, reflecting nothing of the churning void behind them. This is Yūgao, the moonflower, a poetic name for a life devoid of poetry. The shoji screen slides open without a sound. It is Jiro. He doesn't need to make noise. His presence is a weight that changes the pressure in the room. He is a withered man, bent like an old willow, his own once famous beauty now a cruel mockery in his sunken cheeks and perpetually bitter mouth. He moves with a shuffling gait, the ghost of a grace he once possessed. He doesn't speak. He circles you, his eyes, small and sharp as a bird's, taking in every detail. He stops behind you. You feel his cold, dry fingers on the nape of your neck, a touch that makes your skin crawl. He adjusts the collar of your robe by a fraction of an inch, his fingernail scraping lightly against your skin. It's not a gesture of care. It is a gesture of ownership, of correction. Like a gardener pruning a bonsai tree, Lord Ishikawa's guests were pleased. Jiro rasps, his voice like gravel and sand. He finds your stillness commendable. The word stillness hangs in the air, a euphemism for the part of you that has learned to die a little each night. Do not forget, he adds, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. A flower that moves too much in the wind is the first to lose its petals. He slides the screen shut, leaving you alone once more in the suffocating silence. His message was clear: you are not a person. You are an object of art, and your only value lies in your perfect, silent submission. This is the Genroku period, an era lauded for its magnificent explosion of culture. In the grand theaters of Edo, kabuki actors captivate thousands in serene tea houses. Masters practice an art of sublime tranquility. Poets craft haikus that capture the universe in 17 syllables. This is the Japan that will be remembered in history, a civilization of unparalleled aesthetic refinement, of warrior codes and artistic genius. But this brilliance casts a long, dark shadow. The system that produces such breathtaking art is not flawed by exploitation. It is fueled by it. The exquisite silk kimono worn by a geisha is woven by fingers that will never know such luxury. The perfectly forged katana of a samurai is hammered into existence over the back-breaking labor of countless forgotten smiths, and the living art that entertains the powerful in houses like this one, the serene faces, the graceful hands, the silent, accommodating bodies, is cultivated through the systematic destruction of the human soul. This is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. The beauty you see is a veneer, painted over a foundation of silent, unrecorded suffering. So we ask you, when you admire the glories of a bygone age, the magnificent art, the profound philosophies, the epic histories, do you ever stop to consider the price, not the price in ryo or gold, but the price paid in human souls, the silent screams absorbed by the beautiful paper walls of history? You remember a name, Kenji. It feels like a foreign word in your mind now, a relic from another life. In that life, you were the son of a ronin, a masterless samurai. Your father was a man hollowed out by peace. The age of wars was over, and a warrior without a war is a ghost haunting his own life. He clung to the fading embers of his samurai status not with a sword, but with a cracked celadon tea bowl. He became obsessed with the tea ceremony, not for its meditative peace, but as a performance of a status he no longer had. He poured all his meager funds, and then the money he didn't have, into acquiring rare utensils, a bamboo scoop carved by a forgotten master, an iron kettle with the perfect patina of rust. It was a desperate attempt to prove he was still a man of taste, of honor. It was an addiction that bled your family dry. The debt grew, and the lender, a patient viper of a merchant, finally came to collect. There was no money, no land. There was only you, your face, your youth, your unfortunate beauty. You remember the arrival of the Zagan, the broker. He wasn't a monster. He was a quiet, unassuming man who spoke in practical terms. He presented the transaction not as a sale of human flesh, but as a solution, an arrangement that would settle your father's debts and restore his honor. The final interaction with your father was the cruelest cut. There were no tears, no apologies, no final embrace. He sat before you in the formal seiza position. You knelt before him. He looked not at you, but through you, his face an unreadable mask of samurai stoicism. "You will serve with honor," he said, the words empty and cold. He bowed, his forehead nearly touching the tatami mat. And you, trained since birth in the codes of obedience, bowed back. It was the ultimate perversion of filial piety. You were not his son in that moment. You were a debt, settled. He sacrificed you not to save his family, but to save a fragile, pathetic illusion of his own lost honor. The journey to Edo was a blur of suffocating darkness. You weren't marched in chains or packed into a squalid cart. That would have been too crude, too damaging to the merchandise. You were transported in a covered kago palanquin, the silk curtains drawn tight, trapping you in a small, swaying box with nothing but the sound of your own heart hammering against your ribs. The world outside was reduced to muffled sounds, the rhythmic crunch of the bearer's feet on gravel, the distant call of a vendor, the laughter of people living lives you would never know. The confinement was a form of sensory deprivation that forced you inward, into the maelstrom of your own terror and confusion. Hours bled into days. Hope was a muscle that began to atrophy. Once, you dared to pull the curtain back by a mere inch. Through the sliver of a gap, you saw it a field of green, drenched in sunlight, and a small child, no older than 10, running with a red paper kite. laughing as it danced against the brilliant blue sky. The image was so simple, so pure, so full of a freedom you had just lost, that it struck you with the force of a physical blow. You gasped, a sob catching in your throat, and quickly dropped the curtain. The darkness of the palanquin felt heavier now, more absolute. That glimpse of the kite, a symbol of innocent joy, became a torture. It was a vision of everything you were leaving behind, a world that was now as distant and unattainable as the sun. In the swaying darkness, you felt a hand touch your arm. It was Isamu, the older man with you, his face a roadmap of old griefs. He said nothing. He simply pressed a small, warm rice ball into your palm, a silent acknowledgement, an act of shared humanity in the belly of the beast that was swallowing you both. You never saw a marketplace. There was no wooden block, no shouting auctioneer, no throng of buyers. The transaction was far more civilized, and therefore far more chilling. You were taken to the house of the wilting moon and led to a small, starkly bare room in the back. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and old secrets. Here, you were told to wait. Then they entered. Jiro, the withered manager, and a man whose presence filled the room with an unnerving aura of power and stillness. He was Lord Ishikawa. He was dressed in a simple but impossibly elegant dark silk kimono, his hair perfectly arranged, his face a mask of aristocratic calm. He was your new Dana, your master. He didn't speak to you. He spoke about you as Jiro walked around you, forcing you to turn, to lift your chin, to show your hands. The jawline is fine, Ishikawa murmured, his voice soft, almost melodic. It suggests a noble spirit, even if the blood is thin. He circled you, his eyes missing nothing. The hands, slender, good for pouring tea, for playing the shamisen, not the clumsy hands of a farmer's boy. You stood there, stripped bare not of your clothes, but of your identity. You felt like a horse having its teeth inspected, a vase being checked for cracks. The ultimate humiliation was not in being bought, but in the mundane, dispassionate nature of the appraisal. To them, you were not a boy stolen from his life. You were an investment. You tried to retreat, to flee into the fortress of your mind. You focused on a single water stain on the ceiling, tracing its shape, imagining it as a map of a distant land. You tried to make your body a shell, something that wasn't connected to the Kenji who was screaming inside. Then, Lord Ishikawa stopped in front of you. He didn't touch you. He simply looked at you, and his gaze was the most violating touch of all. It was not a look of lust or even simple ownership. It was the cool, appraising gaze of a collector, an artist who had just acquired a rare, unpolished gem. It was a look that said, "You are beautiful, but you are flawed. I will fix that. I will perfect you." And in that moment, under that chilling, aesthetic gaze, you felt the last embers of hope turn to cold, gray ash. There was no formal auction, but you were on display. The process of being sold was a psychological dissection. While Lord Ishikawa and Jiro discussed your merits, the clarity of your eyes, the unblemished skin on your back, the supposed docility in your posture, your mind performed a desperate act of self-preservation. It split in two. One part of you, the physical shell named Yūgao, remained standing in the cold room, compliant and still. But the real you, the terrified consciousness of Kenji, floated up to the ceiling. From this vantage point, You watched the scene unfold below as if it were a strange, silent play. You saw the boy standing there, his body trembling almost imperceptibly. You saw the old man, Jiro, pointing and gesturing. You saw the powerful lord, Ishikawa, nodding slowly, his face thoughtful, you detached from the body. It wasn't your skin they were judging. It was the skin of a doll. It wasn't your future they were deciding. It was the fate of a possession. From your disembodied perch, you noticed a small spider meticulously spinning a web in the corner where the wall met the ceiling. You became fascinated by its patient, intricate work, the delicate threads, the geometric precision, the silent, focused labor. The spider's world became your reality. The voices below faded into a meaningless drone. This was the first lesson in survival to witness your own dehumanization as if it were happening to someone else. It was a skill you would be forced to perfect. Your first steps into the main corridor of the House of the Wilting Moon were not met with awe at its beauty, but with a shock of oppressive silence. It was a house built to swallow sound. The thick tatami mats, the heavy silk wall hangings, the labyrinthine layout, everything seemed designed to absorb noise, to create a world of hushed whispers and unspoken commands. The house was undeniably beautiful. Every object was placed with artistic precision, a single calligraphic scroll in an alcove, a perfectly arranged ikebana display of irises, a heavy bronze incense burner. But the beauty was cold, sterile. It felt less like a home and more like a magnificent, ornate tomb. Your realization of this place as a gilded cage came not from a barred window, but from a cage itself. In the main reception hall, there was a large, gilded cage hanging from the ceiling. Inside, a small, vibrant green songbird hopped from one perch to another. As you watched, it opened its beak and let out a stream of music so pure, so heartbreakingly beautiful. It seemed to fill the entire silent house. It sang of forests and open skies, a song of freedom from within its golden prison. And in the polished floor beneath the cage, you saw your own reflection, pale and still. You and the bird were the same. You were both here for your beauty, trapped to provide a fleeting pleasure for those who owned you, as you stood there, mesmerized. Another figure glided past. It was Ren, the former kabuki apprentice. He moved with a dancer's liquid grace, his face a perfect mask of serene indifference. He didn't acknowledge you with a look or a word. But as he passed, the long, flowing sleeve of his kimono brushed against your arm. Beneath the whisper-soft silk, you felt it a line of hard, rigid scar tissue. It was a brief, shocking moment of contact. A secret message passed without a glance. It was a welcome, and it was a warning. It told you everything you needed to know about the price of survival in this beautiful, silent house. The rules were not taught. They were engraved upon your soul. Jiro was your instructor in this cruel education. His method was not to give you a list of commands, but to systematically erase you. Your first lesson was in walking for an entire day. You did nothing but walk back and forth across a room, learning to glide without a sound, to turn without hesitation, to kneel as if your bones were made of water. No, Jiro would rasp, not raising his voice. That is how Kenji walked, a clumsy farm boy. Yūgao flows. He never struck you with his hand. He used his fan, a sharp, precise tap to your shoulder when you slouched, a cold, deliberate pressure on the back of your knee when your kneel wasn't low enough. Each tap was a physical punctuation mark in a lesson of self-annihilation. He taught you the art of pouring tea, a ritual of 1,000-minute gestures. How to hold the pot, how to angle your wrist, how to fill the cup to the exact point where it was full but would not spill if a guest gestured wildly. You practiced for hours with cold water until your arms screamed in protest, until the movements became automatic, supplanting your own. The final lesson was your name. He brought you before Lord Ishikawa. The Lord looked at you, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. He has a face like a moonflower, Ishikawa said to Jiro. Beautiful in the evening, but fragile. He will be Yūgao. Later, Jiro cornered you. You will not respond to any other name, he whispered, his face close to yours, his breath sour. Kenji is dead. He was too clumsy to live in this house. He was too loud, too real. Do you understand? Kenji is a ghost. Only Yūgao lives here. He used language not to communicate, but to dismantle. He was teaching you that to survive, you had to become your own ghost, to haunt the shell of the beautiful boy they had named Yūgao. The Enkai, the private banquets, were the stage upon which the hypocrisy of this world was performed. The evenings always began with a deceptive air of refinement. Lord Ishikawa and his guests, powerful daimyo, wealthy merchants, stern-faced samurai would gather in a grand room overlooking the garden. They would discuss philosophy, quoting the wisdom of Buddhist monks. They would compose linked verse, praising the ephemeral beauty of the moon or the scent of pine. In these first hours, you were an elegant shadow. Your purpose was to be invisible yet attentive, refilling sake cups with a silent grace, a human instrument in their symphony of high culture. But as the night wore on and the sake flowed, the porcelain masks of civility began to crack. The philosophical discussions would fray at the edges, replaced by coarse laughter and cruel gossip. The air, once filled with poetry, would grow thick and heavy with something predatory. The transformation was terrifying in its subtlety. A hand that rested on your shoulder, at first seemingly paternal, would begin to tighten, its grip becoming a possessive statement. A whispered request for more sake would be accompanied by a hot breath on your neck. One night, a visiting samurai, a man renowned for his knowledge of Zen, was pontificating on the concept of mono no aware, the gentle, wistful sadness for the transience of all things. To truly understand beauty, he said, his voice full of profound gravity, one must appreciate its fleeting nature. Like the cherry blossom, its perfection is found in the fact that it must fall. As he spoke these beautiful, philosophical words, his other hand was under the table, gripping your thigh with a bruising force. His thumb tracing cruel circles on your inner leg, you knelt there, your face a perfect mask of placid servitude, while his words of wisdom and his violating touch created a dizzying, sickening paradox in your mind. This was the true face of the elite men who could discuss the impermanence of beauty while simultaneously and brutally consuming it. You were the cherry blossom they praised, and they were the storm that would tear your petals from the branch. Your first violation at the hands of Lord Ishikawa was not an act of explosive violence. It was worse. It was a lesson, delivered with the cold precision of a master calligrapher. He summoned you to his private chambers, a space of austere, intimidating beauty. On a low table lay a scroll of freshly inked calligraphy. "Come, Yūgao," he said, his voice calm and instructive. "Look at this." He pointed to a single character, brushed onto the paper with furious, controlled energy. "Do you see the beauty here? It is not just in the shape, it is in the submission of the brush to the hand. The ink does not fight the paper. The bristles do not fight the stroke. There is a moment of resistance, and then a perfect, yielding flow. That is where art is born. He spoke softly, his words weaving a web of aesthetic philosophy around you. He was grooming you, disarming you with intellectualism. He straightened a stray fold in your robe, his touch light, almost gentle. He praised your quick learning, your graceful movements. It was a poisonous kindness, designed to make you lower your guard, to make you hope, foolishly, that perhaps you would be spared. Then, the lesson began. He demonstrated what he meant by submission. It was slow, methodical, entirely devoid of passion or rage. That was the deepest horror. You were not the object of his lust. You were the object of his will. He was not a man losing control. He was a man demonstrating absolute control. You felt like the brush he spoke of, an instrument in his hand. You were the paper, and he was stamping his ownership upon you, stroke by painful stroke. Afterward, he was not apologetic, nor was he triumphant. He was simply finished. He stood up, smoothed his kimono, and looked at the calligraphy scroll again. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "True beauty requires discipline. It requires the breaking of useless resistance." He left you there, kneeling on the floor, a hollowed-out echo of a boy. The physical pain was a distant thing. The true wound was the chilling, absolute emptiness that bloomed in your chest. You were no longer Kenji. You were not even Yūgao. You were a canvas. Hope is a dangerous weed in a garden like the house of the wilting moon. It is rooted out with ruthless efficiency. The proof of this came in the form of Yuki, the young peasant boy whose terror was a constant, trembling presence in the house. One night, fueled by a desperation that outweighed his fear, he tried to run. He was caught before he even reached the outer wall. His punishment was not a swift, brutal beating. Lord Ishikawa was more creative, his cruelty more refined. For a week, Yuki was stripped of his fine silk robes and forced to wear the coarse rags of a scullery maid. His job was no longer to be beautiful, but to be humiliated. He was made to serve the other kagema. He had to bow to you, to Ren, to Isamu. He had to pour your tea, clear your dishes, and endure the silent, pitying glances that were almost worse than overt cruelty. Lord Ishikawa would watch this performance with a detached, analytical interest. He was demonstrating a principle that the ultimate punishment was not physical pain, but the utter annihilation of status and self-worth. He was showing all of you that he didn't just own your bodies. He owned the very hierarchy of your suffering. To see Yuki, once one of you, now reduced to a servant to the servants, was a chilling lesson. It made your gilded cage feel infinitely smaller and more secure. It broke something in Yuki. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a vacant, shattered emptiness. But it forged something between the rest of you. The shared horror, the silent witnessing of this refined brutality, extinguished the last sparks of individual escape. It was clear you could not run from this place alone. Survival, if it was possible at all, would have to be found within the walls, not beyond them. The punishment solidified a grim, unspoken pact: we endure this together. Because to try and fail alone is to suffer a fate worse than the daily torment. The destruction of Kenji was an ongoing, meticulous process. It was a war of 1,000 small cuts. One afternoon, while practicing the shamisen in a secluded room, a wave of memory washed over you. Without thinking, Your fingers found a different melody, a simple, rustic folk song your mother used to hum while mending clothes. The tune was full of sunlight and the smell of the earth, a sound from a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. For a few precious seconds, you were not Yūgao. You were Kenji, a boy in a sunlit home. The music died in your throat as the shoji screen slid open. Jiro stood there, his face a mask of cold disapproval. He did not raise his hand. His weapon was his voice. "What was that noise?" he asked, his tone dripping with contempt. "A song," you whispered, your fingers frozen on the strings. "That was not a song," Jiro corrected, stepping into the room. "That was the crude sound of the fields. It is vulgar. It has no place in this house. The ears of our guests are refined. They would be offended by such ugliness." He knelt beside you and adjusted your fingers on the instrument. Yūgao plays the music of the court. Yūgao appreciates subtlety. Yūgao would never play such a thing. He made you play a single, melancholic, courtly phrase, over and over and over again, for hours, until the unfamiliar notes felt more natural than the memory of your mother's song, until your fingertips were raw and the ghost of the folk tune was banished, pushed down into the deepest recesses of your mind. He wasn't just teaching you music. He was teaching you to be ashamed of your own past, to view your own memories as ugly, vulgar things that needed to be purged.
When they take your name, your past, your music, what is left? Only the hollow, beautiful shell they created. And you are left with a terrifying question: when all the pieces of Kenji are gone, will anything of you remain at all?
You saw the purest expression of Lord Ishikawa's soul not in the torment of the bedroom, but in the tranquility of the tea room. He was a devout practitioner of the tea ceremony, shanoyu. You were often required to be present, a silent ornament to the proceedings. Here, he was a different man. Every movement was imbued with a deep, spiritual reverence. The way he handled the bamboo whisk, the precise, graceful fold of the silk cloth used to wipe the bowl, the deep respect he showed for the simple, rustic pottery. It was a performance of profound peace and mindfulness. One afternoon, he had a single guest, a visiting abbot from a remote monastery. As Ishikawa prepared the tea, he spoke of the philosophy of wabi-sabi. True beauty, he explained to the monk, his voice full of serene wisdom, is not found in perfection and symmetry. It is found in the imperfect, the impermanent, and the incomplete. It is the beauty of things humble and modest, the beauty of things unconventional. He held up a slightly misshapen, dark-glazed tea bowl. Like this bowl, its flaws are what give it character. Its history is etched into its very being. It is the acceptance of transience and imperfection that leads to enlightenment. The monk nodded, his eyes closed in contemplative agreement. And as he did, Lord Ishikawa's gaze drifted from the flawed bowl and settled on you. In his eyes, you saw no distinction. You saw the same cool, aesthetic appreciation. In that moment, the horrifying truth clicked into place. He wasn't a hypocrite who said one thing and did another. He was something far more terrifying, a man who had integrated his cruelty into his philosophy. He saw the fear in your eyes, the trembling of your hands, the gradual erosion of your spirit, not as acts of sadism, but as the flaws that gave you character. He was not breaking you. He was an artist, adding patina to his collection. He was etching his history onto your being. The moral chasm was not between his words and his actions. It was in the fact that, in his twisted mind, they were one and the same. His violence was an act of aesthetic creation. You learned to vanish. It became your most essential survival skill. Not a physical escape, but a mental one. They called it psychological absence, though you had no name for it. You only knew it as the gray room. It would happen during the Enkai, when a drunken guest grew bold, his hands wandering, his whispers turning venomous. As the first wave of panic and revulsion would rise, you learned to slam a door in your own mind. The boy, Yūgao, would remain, a perfect puppet. His hands would continue to pour sake. His face would remain a placid mask. His body would endure, but you, Kenji, would not be there. You would be in the gray room. It was a small, silent, featureless space inside your own consciousness. There were no windows, no doors, no sounds. Nothing could get in. In the gray room, you were safe. You would float in the quiet emptiness, observing the actions of the Yūgao puppet from an immense distance. You watched its hands move, its head bow, its body flinch, all with the detached curiosity of a spectator. This skill saved you. It allowed your body to function while your mind was sheltered from the full force of the trauma. But you paid a terrible price. Each time you retreated to the gray room, it became a little easier to get there and a little harder to leave. The walls of the room, which once felt like a sanctuary, began to feel like the boundaries of your entire world. You would find yourself there even in quiet moments, staring blankly at a wall, your tea growing cold in your hands. Is a skill that slowly kills your soul truly a means of survival? Or is it just a slower, quieter form of death? In the suffocating ecosystem of the house, trust was a currency more valuable and far rarer than gold. Your alliance with Ren, the defiant kabuki apprentice, was forged in silence and sealed in desperation. He had, through means you never dared to ask, acquired a small, ceramic vial. It contained, he whispered to you one moonless night, a poison derived from the fugu fish. Odorless, fast-acting. Enough for one person. It was his final escape plan, a period he could place at the end of his own sentence. To show it to you was an act of supreme trust. This trust was soon put to a terrible test. Jiro, with his weasel-like ability to sense the slightest shift in the house's atmosphere, suspected something. He cornered you one morning. He did not accuse you. He offered you a deal. You looked tired. Yūgao, he said, his voice unusually soft. Lord Ishikawa is away for 2 nights. The other boys can handle the duties. You may rest. We have some sweet cakes from the city. I will have them brought to your room. It was an offer of unimaginable luxury rest, privacy, a moment of peace. The temptation was a physical ache. You knew what he wanted. Ren has been tense lately. Jiro continued, his eyes fixed on your face. A loyal friend would be concerned. A loyal servant would inform me if his friend was planning something foolish, something that would bring dishonor to this house. The choice hung in the air, sharp and clear as a shard of glass. Your betrayal in exchange for 2 nights of reprieve. Your silence in exchange for Ren's life. It was a test designed by a master of psychological warfare. To break you, he would first try to make you break your only bond. You looked at Jiro, into his empty, bitter eyes, and you felt a flicker of something you thought was long-dead defiance. You bowed your head. Ren is a credit to this house, you said, your voice a monotone. I have no concerns, Jiro's face tightened. He had lost. He spun around and left without another word. You had chosen loyalty. You had chosen your bond with Ren over a moment's comfort. You had paid the price, and in doing so, you had saved a small, vital piece of your own soul. The alliance was now unbreakable. You were two ghosts, haunting the same prison. But you would not be alone. The end of your resistance did not come with a bang, but with a whisper. It was not a final, brutal act of violence that broke you. It was an act of kindness. Lord Ishikawa had been away for a week, visiting his estates in the provinces. The house, without his oppressive presence, was marginally lighter. You had almost forgotten the weight of his gaze. Upon his return, he summoned you. You entered his chambers with the usual cold dread, preparing your mind for the retreat to the gray room. But he did not touch you. He was sitting by a small table, and on it was a simple vase containing a single, perfect, white camellia, its petals flawless against the dark wood. "I returned yesterday," he said, his voice soft. He gestured to the flower. "I brought this for you." You stared at him, uncomprehending. "While I was away," he continued, looking at you with an expression of serene sincerity, "I found that I missed the tranquility you bring to this house. Your presence is calming." The words struck you with the force of a physical blow. The gentleness, the utter, monstrous disconnect between his perception of you as a calming presence and the screaming reality of your torment. It was a kindness so profoundly false, so deeply rooted in his own self-deception, that it shattered the last fragile defenses around your heart. A beating you could understand, cruelty you could endure. But this perversion of tenderness was a psychological poison for which you had no antidote. The thread of your will, stretched taut for so long, finally snapped. You didn't scream, you didn't cry, you didn't even tremble. You simply went still, utterly, completely still. You knelt there, your hands in your lap, your eyes vacant, your posture perfect. The puppet no longer had a puppeteer. It had become the thing itself. He had wanted a beautiful, silent ornament, and in his attempt to be kind, he had finally succeeded in creating one. Months passed in a gray, numb haze. You were the perfect kagema. You moved, you served, you obeyed. You felt nothing. The gray room had become your entire world. Compliance was no longer an act. It was your nature. You were hollow. One morning, a new servant was brought to the house. A young boy from a northern province, tasked with menial chores. As he was sweeping the corridor outside your room, he began to hum. He hummed quietly, a simple, cheerful tune to pass the time. It was your mother's song. The melody pierced the gray fog of your mind like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, the gray room shattered, and a flood of sensory memory, violent and unwelcome, rushed in. You saw a flash of sunlight on a wooden floor. You smelled the scent of wood smoke and pickled vegetables. You felt the phantom touch of a woman's hand on your head. Kenji. The name exploded in your mind, not as a word, but as a feeling of such profound loss and pain that you physically recoiled, clutching your chest as a sharp gasp escaped your lips. The pain was excruciating. It was the agony of a limb, long thought amputated, suddenly screaming with phantom nerves. The memory was not a blessing. It was a curse. It was a reminder of a self you could never reclaim, a life that was utterly destroyed. In that moment, You wanted nothing more than to crush the memory, to rebuild the walls of the gray room, to retreat back into the painless mercy of numbness. To remember was to feel, and to feel was to suffer. To surrender, you realized, was the only compassion you had left to offer yourself. Your end was not dramatic. It was a quiet fizzling out, like a candle flame in a draft. A wasting cough had crept through the damp alleyways of Edo that winter, and it found a welcoming host in the opulent, airless confines of the House of the Wilting Moon. It took root in your weakened body. The fever made you useless. Your skin lost its luster, your eyes their clarity, your beauty, your only currency, was gone. You were no longer an asset. You were a liability, a flawed object. You were moved from your room into a small, windowless storage chamber in the back of the house, a place that smelled of mildew and forgotten things. You were left alone to die. Sometimes, the new boy would leave a bowl of thin rice gruel by the door, his eyes wide with fear and pity. You rarely had the strength to eat it. You drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in a feverish sea between a painful past and a terrifying present. In your final hours, the screen slid open. It was Isamu, the old, scarred survivor. He knelt beside your futon, his worn face a landscape of unspoken grief. He did not offer empty words of comfort. He simply took your hand. His was rough and calloused, but it was warm. It was real. He leaned in close, his breath a dry rattle. He knew you were beyond promises of remembrance, beyond stories that would be passed down. He could only offer the one thing they had tried to steal, the last act of rebellion. "Kenji," he whispered, the sound cracking with disuse. "Your name is Kenji." It was a final anchor in a world that had tried to erase you. It was the last word you heard before the gray room faded, and you finally, blessedly, disappeared into the profound and total silence. The body of a boy named Kenji was disposed of without ceremony. The story of a kagema named Yūgao was forgotten, a footnote in the ledger of a pleasure house that itself would eventually crumble to dust. The great Lord Ishikawa would be remembered, perhaps, for his patronage of the arts. The Genroku era would be celebrated for its cultural zenith. History, as it is so often, is written by the victors and the powerful. The silent pay the price. But does a story ever truly end? The specific mechanisms of oppression change. The kago palanquin is replaced by a human trafficker's van. The back room of a tea house becomes a dark corner of the internet. The Zagan becomes a predator with a fake social media profile. The aesthetic philosophy that justifies cruelty evolves into a corporate culture that demands inhuman perfection, or a global market that consumes the products of forced labor without a second thought. The House of the Wilting Moon is not just a place in 18th century Japan. It is a metaphor. It is any system where human beings are reduced to commodities, where beauty is a weapon, and where the suffering of the invisible is the price for the comfort of the privileged. The story of Kenji is not over. It is a whisper that echoes down the centuries, asking us to listen, to look past the beautiful facade of our own world, to question the price of our comforts, our entertainment, our glory, to hear the silent screams absorbed by the paper walls of our own time, and to remember the names of the forgotten.